Hello everybody, my name is Paul and welcome back to the new news. I hope that everyone's having a fantastic day. I hope that everyone's having a wonderful Wednesday, of course. I hope that you, your family, and your friends are safe, and if not, I really do hope you find that safety and security in the very near future. I really don't want any of the viewers suffering from all of the stuff that's been happening throughout the world. There is a ton of stuff that's happened, especially inside of Ukraine. We have a lot of follow-ups to and a lot of updates regarding different situations and some of the highlights that occurred over the last few days and weeks. There's been a lot of talk about the Crimean base, of course, and there was a lot of stuff yesterday that we covered in that nice 2.5-hour stream that we did. But there's been a lot of updates regarding most of that. And to be fair, a lot of the updates and stuff we usually get usually aren't too uplifting. They're pretty depressing. When we talk about news throughout the world, unfortunately, the stuff that makes the news, generally speaking, is not the good stuff. It's usually a lot of death, destruction, famine, drought, that sort of thing. And so if you can all take a moment, the whole point of this project is to help people. Believe it or not, we want to report the news, of course, and we want to do it in a way that's a little bit different than most mainstream media news sources will do it. We try and do everything independently here. But the thing is that the whole point of this project is to help people and give back to the very news stories that we deliver to you as the audience. And the way you can do that is by checking out the video description below. You'll see a ton of different organizations down there. We're never doing super chats on this channel. We're never pushing merchandising. 100% of everything we do is for charity. And we are going through and we've vetted each and every one of these organizations and fundraisers to make sure that they are legitimate, one, so that way your safety and security is the upfront thing there, but also that 80% or more of the donations that they receive actually go to their programs and actually go to helping people and not just going to people's salaries and administration's costs. So if you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little, and if you can't give anything at all, help us grow the channel by liking and subscribing and letting your friends know about us, because growing this channel is the most important way to actually help people throughout the world, believe it or not, at least if you're involved here on this community. Because the more people that come here and the more people that enjoy the news, overall, the bigger impact we're going to have as a community, as a channel, on helping people throughout the globe. And we hope to be able to do fundraisers and everything else and attach them directly to the stream at some point. We've hit some pretty good highlights. Yesterday was the very first video that got 200 views in just under 24 hours. So it's pretty amazing. There's been a lot of growth here on the channel, and I cannot thank you guys enough for the support you've been giving us and the support you continue to give us, and even more importantly, the support that you've been giving to the organizations in the description. So thank you very, very much. It was awesome to see what happened last night, and I hope to continue to see that going forward into the future. But once again, you guys allow us to be the news that gives back. You are able to give back to this very same news, and I can't think of a better reason to be doing this. I'm not in here for the money. I have a full-time job. Everyone on the news team is volunteering, so it's amazing to be able to do this project, and I can't think of a better community to do it with. And if you have more organizations for us, ones that we may not have, for areas that we may not cover at the moment, we're constantly looking to expand that list. We have a whole website with an entire page dedicated for it. Our Discord has an entire section dedicated for it. And we want to fill up all 5,000 characters of the description with different links for organizations. So please jump onto our Discord. The link's also in the description. You can actually jump on there, join the community, and the fun that's on there is very active and lively. And also get in touch with a staff member or myself. Send us a link, send us a short description of the organization, and we'll start that vetting process and hopefully get it through and actually get it attached to the stream, so that way we continue to raise money for all different places throughout the world. Not just Ukraine, but other places affected as well, as we also cover the international news and not just what's happening in Ukraine. So please let us know if you have more. We'd love to continue adding. But without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump into the news. Before I do, of course, I want to let you know you can leave a comment, or you can actually leave a comment and send it to Riley there in the live stream chat, or you can also go ahead and ask a question. A lot of the stuff is pretty complicated in general terms. Very oversimplified. It's very complicated in a lot of these things, and I'd love to be able to try and answer a lot of these questions to the best of my ability. I served, for a little background as to where my knowledge base is, I served in the Marine Corps between 2016 and 2020. I deployed twice overseas, once to Syria and once to Iraq. I was an O-352 anti-tank missileman, so I am specialized in anti-armor warfare and also in armored doctrine, but in overall arching terms, I was a Marine and I was also an infantryman, so I should be able to kind of give you an idea, especially when it comes to conflicts and counterterrorism operations and ongoing geopolitics regarding the military terms. I should be able to kind of answer questions to a relatively safe degree. I wouldn't consider my expert in anything outside of my actual MOS, but at least you'll have some, credible information as opposed to whatever some random researcher found you. So other than that, we'll go ahead and move right into the news. And, of course, we start off with our special report, which is regarding Ukraine. And this has been the special report ongoing throughout this entire time that we've been up. We started in the middle of the Ukrainian war on day, I believe that was 34. So we would love to stop doing these because we really want the war to end. But, of course, this is the big news right now. And, unfortunately, there's a lot of it. Of course, over here, we start with Kyiv and work our way into the Donbass, and we actually come over here where we have child casualty updates. This is something that comes out from the Prosecutor General's office almost on the daily. Today, they stated, quote, due to the Russian military aggression, as of August 10th, 361 Ukrainian children have died, and 705 children have been injured. Most victims among children are from the Donetsk region, which is very true. That's where some of the most intense fighting is coming from and has been coming from since 2014, when all of this truly did start. The invasion itself by the Russian ground forces really started this year, if you do not count Crimea, but the major invasion of Ukraine started this year, but it's been really ongoing since about 2014 after the Maidan Revolution. That's not the only thing. Ukraine's currently identifying the dead after 16 bodies of Mariupol defenders were actually, they actually were able to repatriate the remains of them. There were 17 in total. 16 of them were from Mariupol, and they have gone to Kyiv, and they're currently undergoing DNA testing and identification. But we do have a report coming here from Euromaidan Press regarding that. It's very sad work, but it's work that needs to be done nonetheless. Being able to identify these individuals and bring closure to those families is very, very important, because families literally do suffer for quite an extended period of time when they've lost a family in a war, especially this early on. But there are people who are still repatriating remains from Korea here in the United States. We still find World War II remains and remains from Korea that get repatriated back over, and their families are still mourning and grieving over that. As we move our way down here, Kharkiv Oblast has gone quiet once again, with one exception, and that is actually up by Izium. Yeah, common sense is not so common these days. We're not quite sure why this has happened, but there are military vehicles that are able to cross rivers. They have these things called fording kits, and to a certain depth, they can actually cross a river and not drown out the engine and completely destroy it. These trucks didn't have that. They didn't have that. So whether the Russian military was very, very seriously following their rip-off GPS, or whether or not this was the work of partisans, it doesn't matter. Maybe they didn't realize that their vehicles didn't have fording kits, but they didn't. And we have a couple of Russian logistical vehicles that have ended up in the river here near Izium. And one of them, it appears that one of them is, so this is a logistical vehicle back here that has been, damaged in some capacity and was being towed. This is actually a repair vehicle. A repair and recovery vehicle, very limited asset. They don't build a lot of repair and recovery vehicles, regardless of what military you're going into. And so now this one is pretty much useless, and this is also useless, as the engines on both of these have been completely flooded. We don't know why this has happened, but considering how many wrecks we've seen from the Russian Federation and their military, I'm going to guess and chalk that one up also to another Russian drinking and driving. This time he was towing something behind him. And that starts to bring us into the Luhansk and Donetsk regions and here into the Donbass, which is really the meat and potatoes of the war. And this is really where the majority of the fighting is taking place. It is quite significant. We've had a lot of developments in the front today, and it's been a lot of interesting developments. A lot of combat is ongoing right now across the entire front. A lot of shelling. So as we can see here, this is Seversk. Seversk, at this point, residents are living in their basements. Seversk is under a sustained bombardment and has been for some time as Russian forces and Ukrainian forces are fighting very bitterly just outside of the city in order to prevent Russian forces from actually seizing the city of Seversk. It's very close to the Luhansk Oblast, but this is what we can best identify as a supporting effort. It's putting additional pressure on Ukrainian forces that may be in areas such as Soledar, Bakhmut, Chasiv Yar, Kostanivka, and Toretsk, which is where the main axis of advance for Russian forces in this sector of the front is currently at. So we know that there's a major offensive within the Soledar to about Toretsk area, and this offensive, it seems to be rather minor in comparison, but nonetheless, it means that troops are needed to be sent and pulled from the major offensive, or the defense against that major Russian offensive in the south, and immediately drawn up and put in Seversk where they could better be utilized somewhere else in truth. But failing to do so, this is actually on the Ukrainian flank if you're in this area, and so you would actually jeopardize your flank if you do not defend it. So that's kind of what we're seeing. It's very highly kinetic at this point, but reportedly the citizens are basically running on extremely low food and water at this point, as it's just not safe to even come out of their own basements, which they're being used as ad hoc bomb shelters at this point. The entire city is burning, and the entire city has essentially been leveled and destroyed as of this moment. Of course, the dead and wounded have been tallied up. Normally, we get the daily Donetsk update that we cover here on the channel. Today, it seems that they have tallied up all of the dead and wounded thus far. Quote, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, Russian aggressors have killed 705 people and injured 1,823 citizens of the Donetsk region. That's coming from Pavlo Krylenko, who's the head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration. The amount of fighting that has taken place here over since 2014, even more so since the beginning of this war, is incomprehensible. The amount of shelling, especially, that has happened in this area. It's relatively stagnant because both sides are about equal in their capabilities and strength. So it's very difficult for them to outmaneuver each other, and it's very much a meat grinder, as has best been described. It is a meat grinder for both sides. In fact, the Russians are taking more casualties simply because by the rules of war, essentially, or it's essentially like the laws of war, but like physical laws in reference to physics. They're not. War is almost down to a science. Attacking enemies usually take more casualties than defensive enemies or defensive forces. And the Russians, being the attacking force, are inherently going to take more losses. This is why you usually look for a 2 to 3 advantage over your opponent when you're invading their nation. Russia didn't bother doing that to begin with, and they're constantly paying for it. It's a war of attrition, and here in the Donbass, because it has been essentially fighting since 2014, both sides have maintained very, very rigorous, static, trench defensive lines that are extremely difficult to break through on either side. It's also very heavily mined throughout here. Really, it makes it almost impossible, which is why for the first few months of this war, you didn't hardly see any action down here in the south, because simply it was deemed too improbable to break through Ukrainian lines in the south, and because it would put Russian troops at so much risk trying to break through these, that even for the Russians, they considered it unsustainable losses to achieve their objectives. Soledar at this point, being one of the main points of Russian offensive in this region, and being the northernmost flank of Bakhmut and its defense, We see here that street fighting, at least according to the Russians and Russian state news media, has begun inside the city itself. Soledar is not a huge city, but it is a city nonetheless, and it's kind of like an anchoring point for the Ukrainian troops within this area, as they have that ring defense around Bakhmut, which they've been holding on to since the Popasna Gap over here actually opened earlier on in the Donbass campaign. Now Soledar is apparently devolved into street fighting and close quarters combat, which we will see ongoing probably for the next few days, if not weeks, depending on how stiff resistance or offensive capabilities are within this region. We do have a video regarding this. So Russian news media, this is obviously, there was no audio with this one for whatever reason. Not quite sure as to why they would do this with no audio, but you can see they are in the city itself, or at least on the outskirts at this point. Now, military operations in urban terrain, even in small villages, is extremely difficult. It's also very deadly. In fact, when you're taking a city or going into any type of military operations in urbanized terrain or mount, you are expecting to have 80 to 85% casualties or more as the attacking force, and that's something that military planners, at least in the United States, are their expectations, and it seems relatively consistent. If you look at things, if you look at battles such as the Battle of Fallujah in 2004, the second battle specifically, or if you're talking about many of the different battles that were ongoing during the Vietnam War, during the Tet Offensive, you see very high casualty rates amongst attacking forces within those cities. And the Russians should be expecting no less, even in a smaller city such as this. But that doesn't mean a valiant defense isn't ongoing. Mi-24 attack helicopters, helicopter gunships, which are heavily utilized by the Ukrainian Air Force, actually came into the Bakhmut region in support of defensive ground forces there to try and conduct some runs against the Russian troops as they're conducting these offensives and wipe out some of their troop concentrations and vehicle concentrations within this region, which once again lies along a very major axis of advance for the Russian troops within the Donbass, and we can see that here. Yeah, look at that. That is a welcoming sight if you are Ukrainian on the front lines. A very welcoming sight. Very, very good sight indeed. And these things are affectionately known by their air crews as the flying tank. Or the flying tub, depending on which one you want to talk about. But these things are very well armored. Of course, they're still very vulnerable to man-portable anti-air defense systems or man-pads, but they are very effective in their roles and have proven very effective time and time again. So the Ukrainian air crews, we know, are also very, very good pilots, especially the Mi-24 pilots, because they've conducted deep strikes all the way into Belgorod with these things. So we're pretty confident that they know what they're doing here. Bakhmut, though, is still under a steady stream of artillery barrage. Quote, Russian aggressors fired missiles at the city of Bakhmut in Donetsk region on August 10th. 7 people were killed, 6 citizens were injured. Local residential buildings and shops were damaged. And that's coming from the Prosecutor General's office once again. Actually, going to jump over here to Luhansk, where the recruiting drive within the LPR has continued, to say the least. So basically, they're mobilizing troops. They take out several members of the resistance forces, or the rebels, separatists, whatever you want to call them, Russian puppets. I don't care what you call them, just not orcs, por favor. They went and they get on buses and military trucks. They bring them in there. They even bring drones to hunt down different men that they see throughout the city of fighting age, and then they literally go and they take them and they throw them into the military fray. Because they aren't considered Russia, according to even the Russian Federation, because they are considered an independent nation and not Russian, by Russia. That means that they can forcefully mobilize their population, whereas Russia, because they haven't declared it a war yet, cannot. And that is the key thing there. So we see this over and over again. We continue to see it even today. So as you can see, they got this bus pulling up. And they're running around. And this guy literally walks out of his house. It stops and immediately goes back inside. Nope. Not happening. And here comes this guy. And his buddy. And they're going to go grab this guy. And they're going to force him into the military for the fight in Ukraine. Because why? Well, because they're having manpower shortages. Pretty severe ones. Well, that one got away. And we see this over and over again. And we've also seen women going and beating them over it. But as we can see here, this is a photo compilation of some of these mobilization vehicles. And as you can see, they're literally just pulling guys off the street and throwing them in buses and trucks to go fight in Ukraine. And to go fight on the front lines. And it's all they're doing. It's not really a recruitment drive. It's a forced mobilization. You're voluntold. But women are fighting off the DPR recruiters as they try to mobilize their bus driver. Yeah, needless to say, these ladies were not very happy. Also, the old man, like, kind of quickens his step a little bit as he walks by. Like, he's afraid he's going to get pulled into this. The manpower shortages cannot be understated, though. Every time Russian Federation, and as a result, the whatever you want to call the separatist forces, they are basically they're highly mechanized. They don't have any light infantry units. They only have mechanized and motorized military forces, which is not proven very successful for the Russian Federation. But every time you lose a vehicle, the crew is getting killed and injured. Every time every time you lose a tank, every time you lose an MTLB, every time you lose a truck, every time you lose a Gaz Tiger, every time you're losing, name a vehicle, there's somebody inside driving that usually. And there's guys inside of it that are being carried by it. If it's an armored personnel carrier or a motorized vehicle, they're losing troops, either killed in action or wounded in action, every time that a vehicle is being destroyed. And it's not usually just one. It's usually more than one. It's usually a group of them. It takes 3 people to crew a T-72, T-80, or T-90. The manpower shortages can't be understated. Russia has stockpiles for days, and they can keep pulling, antique equipment out of their museums to throw out this front lines. But if you don't have anyone to drive and crew the things, it really doesn't matter. And according to some sources, the LPR has been ordered by the Russian Federation that they need to muster 17,000 new troops. And we do know that there are volunteer battalions that are being mobilized inside of Russia as well. We have an extra spicy drone to show off to you today. It is very much an extra spicy drone. We've seen all sorts of cool kind of configurations with quadcopters that the Ukrainians have done. The Islamic State and different militant insurgencies really took the quadcopter and ran with it. They would tie grenades on strings to them and all sorts of things in the Middle East. The Ukrainians have industrialized this, and they have made it even more and more effective with some ingenious setups. We've seen them, build homemade weaponry, homemade carrying devices for these using 3D printing. And now we see that they have gone and they've made it to where they are dropping more than, I'd say, 2 munitions at a time. This is a very extra spicy drone. This is a big extra spicy drone. Yeah, not my idea of a good day. I could not imagine being a Russian troop underneath this thing. I could not imagine being in the Russian military as this thing hovered above me and ruined my day. Because that is what is going to happen. It's just a quadcopter. It's got 6 tubes, and it is going to screw up your day. And we've seen very effective work and very effective usage of those quadcopters all across the front over and over again. But that is a very large and extra spicy drone that they have put together over there. I guess this one you could label as cheers, because the Ukrainians destroyed an ammunition depot located inside of a brewery in the city of Donetsk. Man, you know, you gotta wonder. They gotta be running. You know, they decided to convert a brewery of all things. The Russians did. Known stereotypically for their love of vodka and alcohol, and they converted a brewery for ammunition depots. They must be running out of locations to put them, because I think this was one of the last ones they'd consider. But they did destroy another logistical hub, the Ukrainians did. They struck it. They did another precision strike. It hit this brewery, and it did end up destroying another ammunition depot, which we do have several videos of that here for you today. And it's a big raging fire right now. It's burning. It's burning nice and toasty. And as you can see here, that fire is it can be viewed from any part of the city right now. It is a very roasty fire. Extra roasty over there. So, but it's another. It continues to cripple. The Russian Federation is not known for their logistical capabilities. It's something that they've been lacking, especially when you compare them to, say, the United States. The United States is separated from anywhere that they would ever fight a war by 2 gigantic oceans. So the United States, just out of necessity, had to develop an amazing logistical system and amazing logistical capabilities to conduct war outside of the United States and North America, because once again, there's 2 gigantic oceans, which is why it's almost impossible to invade the United States. So the Russian Federation, not so much, because they're mainland Europe, and because they were expecting to fight a war in Europe. They really didn't develop logistics as much as they probably should have. We saw the ramifications of this in 2008 during the invasion of Georgia, but we see this continued further here into Ukraine. They actually only started with about 2/3 of the logistical vehicles that they even needed to begin the invasion in order to supply and continue continuous operation and kinetic operations with 15 battalion tactical groups on the front. They didn't have that. They needed about 6,000 vehicles, a little bit over. They have about 4,500, a little bit under, when they started. That doesn't include losses that they've taken thus far. The Ukrainian military at this point, using HIMARS and the Mars 2 systems, are very capable of conducting very precise, very good precision strikes on a lot of these ammunition depots, logistical hubs, command and control centers, and it makes it very difficult to actually maintain any kind of sustained engagement on the part of the Russian Federation. Their logistical capabilities at this point are completely on the verge of collapse, especially within the south, and it's really causing the Russian forces to lose the initiative and lose the momentum that is needed to maintain any kind of real purposeful military, kinetic operations, offensive operations in Ukraine. And they just simply, even their artillery cannot keep up the rate of fire. And that can be easily viewed on the firm's fire map if you ever check it out. That's out by NASA. U.S. MRAPs were spotted in Ukraine. American-made MRAPs, which were built by the Oshkosh Corporation up in Wisconsin, have showed up within service in Ukraine. MRAPs provided much better protection to the crews and the troops inside than the Humvees, which we know have been given to Ukraine by the United States and NATO allies. The Humvee is older, and it's a very great vehicle. I love Humvees. I would like to actually buy one myself, but the fact is that Humvees are also an older design, and they have some design flaws as a result. They have flat bottoms. They were not intended for the armor packages that they're normally carrying. Therefore, they have issues with regarding their suspension, and their motor really, at this point, isn't adequate, especially with a lot of the higher rated armor upgrades. The motor really lacks in enough power to pull this thing along, causing a lot of mechanical breakdowns. So while it is a great utility vehicle, it does have its shortfalls, even though they're vast in number. The MRAP is much better. This is a American MRAP, and the reason why is, one, it has a V-shaped hull, meaning that instead of the explosion hitting that flat bottom and deciding the easiest way for that energy to disperse is to go inside of the vehicle by pushing its way through. The V-shaped hull, it hits that V shape and it disperses out the side. So all that energy is going out the sides, mitigating about 90% of that blast. It also has a higher armor capability and a much better motor, much better suited for carrying that massive amount of armor. Rooster Cyber said, don't like flat bottoms, had to say it. I don't think anyone likes flat bottoms, Rooster. I don't think anybody likes flat bottoms. That's for sure. Don't let them fool you. Anyway. So the MRAP is a very amazing vehicle. I have driven these things. They drive like a semi truck. In case you're wondering, they drive like a semi. They feel about as high as that too. They're very high. You have to climb quite a bit to get inside of an MRAP, much more than you do like a Humvee. But they're very good vehicles, very durable, very reliable. They are a little bit top heavy, but I don't think anybody can really say too much about that, considering there's several thousand pounds of armor sitting on top of it. Unfortunately, a Bayraktar drone has been shot down by Russian forces. A Ukrainian TB2 Bayraktar, which appears to have been reportedly one that was given to Ukraine prior to the invasion even occurring, seems to have been shot down at the front. But in all reality, this is an expectation. The fact that more Bayraktars have not been shot down is quite impressive to me. To be fair. The Russians certainly have the capability to shoot down Bayraktars in a lot better quantity, though we have seen some pretty funny points in which case the Russians seem to be using inflatable tubes in order to mimic S-300 batteries, but the fact is that with their actual weapon systems, they are able to shoot down Bayraktars. And the good news is that Ukraine maintains a good fleet of them. They use them very wisely and sparingly. And they also seem to have an ever-expanding fleet that is replenishing any losses that they might be sustaining. The Poles up in the north seem to be really sustaining that quite a bit, as I believe they've crowdfunded 3 Bayraktars, all of which were given to Ukraine for free, and the money was then donated to the armed forces of Ukraine. So, but we do know that this is a legitimate shoot-down of a Ukrainian Bayraktar. So it has been unfortunately destroyed. So I saw this meme today in several different points. Less of a meme, more of people were making fun of this because it seemed stupid, and I wanted to explain something about this, being as this is something that's a little bit more of my field overall. So a lot of people were putting like clown faces and everything with a Russian T-80 that was captured, and they're showing off rubber armor on it. And I want to make some clarifications onto why. It's not because Russia sucks. It's actually a real type of armor. Everyone knows about ERA, explosive reactive armor. It's those little blocks of armor that you see on tanks on top of like their actual metal built-on armor. The whole point of that is it has a shape charge in it, and it blows up and away from the vehicle. It doesn't hurt the armor at all, the main armor of the vehicle. It blows up and away from the vehicle, and it destroys an explosive warhead as it's coming in to destroy that vehicle. So it keeps it from penetrating. This type of armor, and I'll show you here what I'm talking about. If it'll load. So as you can see, like, they're putting like clown faces. This isn't the only place I've seen this. I saw this on pretty much each and every one of our all of our third-party independent sources. So you'll see here these little plates here, these little blocks and chunks. He's gonna pop one of these open here, and you're gonna see like it's rubber on the inside. Which to the average person doesn't make any sense. It makes it look like they're using a really cheap material. But that's actually the point. This is called NERA, non-explosive reactive armor. It's also known as NXRA, or non-energetic reactive armor, because they are developing energetic reactive armors that use electricity to do the similar job and would be reusable. But the point of this is it's very cheap. The great thing about NERA, the whole point is, if I can find it here, so it has two plates. It really sits in these kind of like holes here, and they stack. And there's a top plate there, and it kind of is like a hole underneath, or it's kind of like a little box in there. And then they have a bunch of, it's a composite, but it's mostly rubber, a rubberized material with some other materials in there. And it's a cheap type of reactive armor that's really, really good against AT-4s, law rockets, M3 Carl Gustavs, or RPG-7s, that kind of thing. High explosive anti-tank, light and medium anti-tank weapons. But what it does is the explosive force of this, instead of using a very expensive explosive shape charge to produce, all you really got to do to mitigate against, light anti-armor weapons, especially for a tank, is you just have to use some armor plating, some very light armor plating, and some rubber. And what happens is the main explosive warhead, it hits and it impacts, the shape charge goes off, detonating, and that shape charge, instead of puncturing into the main armor of the tank, or attempting to puncture through the main armor of the tank, will actually go through the first armor plating, and it gets caught up and it loses all of its momentum and is absorbed by the rubber and the other materials inside, which melt and everything else, but it absorbs the copper, the copper jet that is trying to puncture through this tank, and it loses all of its momentum and penetration capability before it actually reaches any of the main armor. So the main armor isn't damaged, while you do end up destroying that reactive armor because it's a one-time use. It's very effective against things that have a single charge warhead, and it is a light or medium anti-tank weapon. There is really nothing that can stop something like the Javelin or the or say the TOW, any of the TOW systems, or anything like the Metis M or anything like that, because they use tandem warheads. There's more than one warhead. The precursor charge on a Javelin, the whole point is to destroy reactive armor. And whether that is explosive reactive armor, non-explosive reactive armor, or energetic armor, reactive armor, it does the same. And then you have a main warhead that's actually going to puncture through the tank once you get rid of these little blocks on top. There's not really anything to stop a tandem warhead at this point as we're reporting this. I'm sure something is in development somewhere. But the only thing that Russia has at its disposal to have any chance against it, you've seen those cope cages. They don't work, but the T-90 has something called an arena cast, or arena close-in air defense system. But it has not really, they're normally not maintained very well. They normally have limited munitions, limited use, and they also haven't proven very effective. It's theoretically possible it can destroy a Javelin or an incoming tandem warhead, but it's improbable. But if you see someone making a joke about this, it's funny up front, but the fact is it's cheap, and that's the whole purpose. It is made out of rubber. It is rubber armor, but it's really effective if someone's shooting at you with an RPG. So it is something, and the U.S. is really one of the main nations to have developed this type of armor. So it's not something, it's not just the Russians who do this. The United States does it too, and many other nations throughout the world. It's just no one's probably seen it up close and personal. Russian troops from the 204th Division, 4th Battalion, decided to say hello and send some messages home in a video here today, and they look wrecked. I mean, just look at these guys.
4-й полк, 4-й батальон и приветы городу, близким.
Привет, Киев-1, спасибо за посылку, я вас люблю, все у нас нормально.
Надя, Вероника, привет, город Ровенький. Спасибо за посылку.
Красный партизан, привет.
Сухогорск, Молодогвардейск, сестра Вита, привет.
Город Ровенький, привет. Луганску, привет. Лиловый, привет. Свердловск, привет. Мама, папа, сестра, все родственники, все.
So they're just going through and saying, their hellos or whatever. But look at these guys. I mean, they are just beat. They are beyond beat. Beyond beat. The look on their faces alone tells you that morale is deplorable. And that is really the make or break. The thing is that Ukraine is fighting for something. It's fighting for something. It's fighting because its people don't want to be massacred. That's a thing. Like, you don't want them to, have genocide against them. Rooster Cybers, as are those Russians. Yes, those are Russian troops. And they're beat. Just the look in their eyes, they're beat. They're tired. They're demoralized. They've been fighting and dying and not really taking too much ground. They haven't met most of their objectives. They're taking unsustainable losses. They haven't been rotated out. They are just getting replacements. They're not really getting rotated, out of the line and brought back for at least some R&R. Rest and recruit before they head back out. They're just being continuously mauled in a meat grinder, and they look it. And that is the difference between your average Ukrainian infantryman and your average Russian infantryman. Your average Ukrainian infantryman's fighting for something. The Russians didn't even know that they were coming here. Reportedly, an Su-25, which is a Frogfoot, has been shot down over the Zaporizhzhia Oblast. Quote, the Armed Forces of Ukraine shot down a Russian ground attack aircraft Su-25 on August the 10th in the Zaporizhzhia region. That's coming from the press service of the National Guard of Ukraine. So, reportedly, another aircraft has been downed. That's not the only thing. According to Alexander Suruk, who is the head of the Zaporizhzhia Regional Military Administration, quote, on August the 9th, Ukrainian Air Defense Forces shot down 2 Russian missiles in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast, end quote. So, they shot down 2 missiles and a jet. So, the Russian Air Force is not doing so good right now. They seem to be taking a little bit of losses and not meeting their objectives. Charlton Brook, said they look scared and sad too, like their mates have been killed. All my friends are dead is probably the best way to describe it. If you're talking about the front line, they look, Aravis Shank says they look also thin. Yeah. I've been in some pretty deplorable situations when it comes to being in terrible logistics or whatever have you. When I went to Syria, I went there and I was 168 pounds. I came back and I was 127 pounds. So it doesn't take very long. On average, if you're conducting, some kind of operations or conducting training or something, and being, doing your job as an infantryman, you're going to lose, you're going to be burning anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000 calories a day, sometimes upwards of 10,000 calories a day. It depends on how intense the operations that you're conducting are. And an army moves on its stomach, These guys are very thin because they've been fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting. Probably, I'd almost guarantee since the beginning of the war, these guys probably haven't been rotated out. And they aren't being very well supplied to begin with, so they're not getting enough food. They're not getting enough calories to burn, and so they're losing a lot of weight. They're losing a lot of weight. They're probably very hungry. Their stomachs, I will almost guarantee, have shrunk because they're not eating nearly as much as they used to be. And if they were to eat like they used to, they would probably get very sick because that's what happened to me when I came home. I went out and I had a nice big double cheeseburger. I love cheeseburgers. For anyone that doesn't know, bacon cheeseburgers are amazing. Biggest one I can get, and I got very sick. I did not feel very well. So I guarantee that's what would happen to these guys. The food that they normally do get is very inadequate. It's usually very molded or it's not very good. We've seen the inside of Russian kitchens before. Most of the food was rotting or decayed or had a lot of issues with it. The Russian military, logistically, once again, is not very sound. They have been in probably continuous combat since the beginning of the war, which means that this unit, effectively, I would be willing to bet, is probably been, by all standards, rendered completely combat ineffective. Think about throwing yourself at a brick wall over and over and over again, and you just keep breaking bones, but you keep throwing yourself at the wall, and that's what these guys are doing. And as you know, the more you break, the less and less easy it is to throw yourself at the wall, and the less and less effective you are against it. And that is, the less and less you can hit it, the hard, it gets a lot hard. You can't hit it nearly as hard. And that's what's happening to these guys. Every single day, they're going out and they're taking casualties and they're not getting them replenished. They're not getting pulled off the line. They're being demoralized. They don't really want to fight. They didn't even know they were coming there to begin with. They don't want to fight, and they're less and less effective when they do fight, which means they take even more casualties. Which means that they are then even less effective because then they have to go back out and they take even more casualties because they're less effective. It's a very, very vicious cycle. When a unit becomes combat ineffective, you have to rotate it out. You have to. JP, I'm not going to try and pronounce your last name. I've screwed it up way too many times. I'm sorry, man. But JP says, Russian soldiers looking like they've been mercilessly shelled night and day. Yeah, these guys are going to have the 1,000-yard stare, 100%, if they live long enough to have it, but they are going to have the 1,000-yard stare. The fact of the matter is that they, the cringy beam, all my friends are dead. Well, that's pretty true for these guys. Their entire unit has essentially been completely wiped out. More than likely. Their entire unit has been either killed or wounded in action, missing in action, or, their vehicles are mostly been completely destroyed, probably replaced. And it's just been merciless shelling, bombardment, ineffective military operations, incapable of seizing any real military objectives, frustration from the command, conflicting orders, and you're not even able to feed yourself. Hell, you're lucky if you have full capacity on your ammunition at this point. If you're going out and you have all of the ammunition that you're supposed to, you're probably a replacement that just showed up. If they're even getting replacements. Because, as we know, their logistical capabilities for their actual just ammunition and basic stuff to fight a war isn't getting to the front lines nearly at the rate it was earlier on, just a couple weeks ago. Of course, we have a perfect addition for your kit for anybody that might be interested or may have a tactical or a tactical vest or plate carrier. Quote, this Ukrainian says, quote, tactical plate carrier attachment in case you get stressed. It's a perfect stress attachment. I could have used one of these when I was overseas.
Тактична насадка на бронежилет. Вдруг у тебе стреси такі. Зразу легше. Чуть ляжу легше, да? Чуть ляжу легше.
I will have one of those for my tactical vest. Evershang says, so they're not feeding the troops. They are feeding the troops, but they're not feeding them as much as they need to be, nor are they feeding them nearly as well. As if you look at history and you look at rations, for instance, as wars drug on, the nations that were, usually the victors of a conflict usually ate much better than those as the war drug on. They normally increasingly ate better throughout the war. Those that were normally losing the war ate usually worse throughout the war, and their rations were usually normally cut, over time throughout the duration of the war until they were almost nothing. Yeah, Riley says just enough to keep them going. That's all it is. Enough to sustain you long enough to be killed by the enemy. Where do I sign for that kitten? Hey man, there's no paperwork that goes along with one. You can always go down to your local humane society and adopt one, or I recommend an older animal especially, as they're usually a lot more loving, believe it or not. Kittens are little terrors, as adorable as they are, but cats can be very loving, especially the older ones. And they also don't tear up your shit. As you jump over here, this is right here. This is in Vasilivka. Vasilivka is right here on the front lines, like right at the edge. This is the last Russian checkpoint before you start going into no man's land and then over to Ukrainian lines. Reportedly, according to Ivan Fedorov, who's the mayor of Melitopol, quote, 10 Ukrainian citizens died at the Russian checkpoint in Vasilivka in the Zaporizhzhia region while waiting in a queue to go to the territory controlled by Ukraine. And the thing is that they're waiting in a queue, but they are not being allowed to go to Ukraine, which is a war crime. Which, considering everything else, actually continues to play once again into the whole crimes against humanity that we've talked about quite extensively. And I would say that Russia is committing crimes against humanity. In fact, I would say, in my humble opinion, after reading, the Geneva Conventions, the protocols of the Geneva Conventions, international humanitarian law, customary international humanitarian law, on the ICRC, on the UN website, reading the legal definitions by the ICC regarding crimes against humanity, genocide, and ethnic cleansing. While I may not be a lawyer, and after having ROE briefs while going into a kinetic situation while in the military, I can safely say that I would be willing to bet that Russia more or less is committing a genocide done poorly. And this only continues to really back that rhetoric. And the war crimes that we see just continue to back it as well. Nikopol was once again struck, and, quote, rocket attacks on the Dnipropetrovsk region on August the 10th. 11 people were killed. 13 citizens were injured. Local residential buildings, a palace of culture, a hostel, two schools, and the city council building were damaged. This is coming from Valentin Reznichenko of the Dnipropetrovsk Regional Military Administration. As we can see, some of the major damage coming out of there. And as we can see here, this is from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for Ukraine. So quite extensive shelling ongoing within Nikopol, probably coming from the Enhadar nuclear facility, which is being used as a Russian base and artillery location, which they have actually openly said that they would blow up. So that's a thing, by the way. They actively have stated that they would blow up the Enhadar nuclear facility and cause a massive nuclear catastrophe. And they're also not letting the International Atomic Energy Administration come in and do their usual inspections. Another one, Ukraine destroyed another ammunition depot, reportedly. Quote, the armed forces of Ukraine destroyed a Russian ammunition depot and an enemy command and observation post in the Kherson region on August the 9th. So yet another yet another blow to the Russian capability to even fight a war. If you don't have ammunition, you don't have orders, then it's really hard to fight a war. Believe it or not. As you come down here and we look at Nova Kakhovka has been in the news several times, and it's been notoriously used for huge ammunition depots. Well, another thing that's very important about Nova Kakhovka is it's now the last crossing across the Dnipro River that you can use a road. And the thing is that we know that Ukraine has struck the bridge here. It's kind of a bridge. They've actually struck the dam here. Tom Horn says, sorry, you're full of yourself. Ukraine has been executing its mayors. Well, considering the quotes are pretty consistent throughout the last, I don't know, where are we at? 110 streams now? And pretty much nobody's been replaced, and the ones that have, we're all tracking on where they're at. I can't believe that, considering I get quotes from them every day. I highly recommend conducting your own research, however. And if you have evidence of this, I highly recommend you shoot it over to me on our Discord. But other than that, going back to the main topic here, the thing is that the Dnipro River is highly utilized because it's a major river, and the road here, which is highly utilized, is the last one that you can cross across the Dnipro River using a vehicle, a motorized vehicle. The thing is that Ukraine has struck this. Now, the damage is not nearly as severe as it would have been if it was, say, the Antonovsky Bridge. The reason being is the fact that the road actually is right up against and is partially connected to a dam across the Dnipro River. You blow up the dam and destroy its stability, you risk flooding everything downriver, including the city of Kherson itself, which doesn't work for anybody. And Ukraine's not really trying to do this. They're not trying to destroy the dam. But the roadway here has been very heavily damaged by HIMARS strikes. I think this is on erring on the side of caution by the gunners of these missile systems, trying specifically avoiding to destroying the dam. But it's caused very severe damage to the road systems and has completely destroyed the rail lines coming through here, which is very, very important to note, because Russia, trying to move any large quantities of equipment, heavily utilizes rail lines throughout this area. So we can take a look at that right here. Okay, so I just got done reading some of the chat while that video was playing, and you know what, I apologize. I did not give a very good answer to that. I was pretty snarky in that. So allow me to probably explain myself a little bit more thoroughly. And so, to remind everybody, let's see here. Tom Horn says, sorry, you're full of yourself. Ukraine has been executing its mayors. In which case I did ask for proof. But the thing is that here's the thing. The Russian Federation has input in pretty much every single location, whether you're talking about the Kherson Oblast or you're talking about over here in Melitopol with what they control the Zaporizhia Oblast, or of course the Donetsk and Luhansk, which they already had puppet states in, Mariupol as well. Mostly over here in the more western part of Ukraine, we see a lot of partisan activity. Now, these occupational governments are half military run and half civilian run. Civilian run being Russian collaborators, people who are usually older in age that would have a fondness or nostalgia for the Soviet Union, because that is a lot of what the Russian rhetoric is regarding to things like the Great Patriotic War, which so on and so forth. And there are, I'm not going to say that there aren't people inside of Ukraine that don't want to be with Russia. That's perfectly fine. There are people in the United States that don't want to live in the United States. People can move to other countries. That's a thing. You can get a visa. I'm sure Russia would happily accept you. Once again, this does not justify Russia's action in this war. Once again, to quote Alternate History Hub, if you guys have ever watched them. This does not justify the actions of Putin or the Russian military. Now, being that these guys are collaborators and working with an occupational government, there is a resistance movement ongoing inside of Novokhovka, Kherson, Melitopol, and all of these regions. They are targeting members of the government, especially civilian members of the occupational government, and killing them. One, I believe, is actually the occupational governor of the Kherson Oblast was actually sent back to Russia for treatment after he was suspected to have been poisoned, and I believe the mayor was also shot and killed inside of Kherson. And this is after a series of attacks conducted by partisan activity. These are resistance fighters. Russia declares them terrorists, and you even see that word being used if you watch RIA Novosti, or you watch Taz, or you watch RT, or if you watch, I can literally name off any of them that you would like, or Russia 1, Russia News 1. They are all labeling them terrorists because they're in occupied territory. The fact of the matter is, this is occupied territory. It's not a military, it's not a, it's not Russia. I hate to break it to you. This isn't Russian. It's not Russia. It's Ukraine. Chaos says Russian-backed mayor of Kherson in Ukraine was poisoned by a chef who began working in his house just a day before, according to reports. So in any case, it wasn't Ukrainian mayor. It was Russian-backed stooge. Exactly. And please, I highly recommend that you, please, I know that's not super serious, but don't use derogatory terms for anybody here or anything like that. Try and keep it professional if you can. But the thing is that these are occupational governments. It's not Russia, it's Ukraine. And Ukraine is defined as including Crimea and the country of Ukraine under the United Nations Charter once it was accepted into the United Nations. Now, Russia is encroaching on that. Crimea is Ukraine, and Russia, just because they've occupied it and annexed it, it doesn't work like that. You're not you're not a town annexing a county, okay, that's in the same state or something like that. And even then, the city has to actually, put up a vote, not waltz in there, police barricade the whole area, beat everyone down, and then they get to have a vote after they've been beaten half to death and everyone else is silenced. That's not how that works. So, I hate to break it to you, but all of this is still Ukraine, and these are occupational governments, and anybody that is fighting against these, technically, since they're living under military occupation, is considered a partisan or an insurgent. A terrorist, no. And that's the fact of the matter. And if if they are killing their mayor, or those mayors, once again, occupational government. If you don't want to be killed, don't work in an occupational government or a collaborator. Nazi collaborators didn't fare any better of a fate, and the Soviet Union definitely proved that, didn't they? So, needless to say, Novokhovka is really ongoing well. I hope I answered your question, by the way, Tom. And we jump over here to Mykolaiv. Mykolaiv was once again shelled, according to Vitaly Kim, who's the head of the Mykolaiv Regional Military Administration. Quote, Russian occupiers shelled the city of Mykolaiv on August the 10th. 3 people were injured, including 1 child. Local residential buildings, enterprise infrastructure, and motor depot were damaged, and we see this quite often. Mykolaiv is shelled almost on the daily, and it seems to have continued to increase and increase and increase as pressure is being put on the Russian Federation inside of the Kherson Oblast. The star burns brightest before it goes out, and I think that may be what we're seeing here. Down here in Odessa, according to the press service of the State Enterprise Seaports Administration of Ukraine, quote, 12 ships of agricultural products have already left Ukrainian ports and are heading to 7 countries worldwide, end quote. So it's great to see that shipments of grain continue underneath that treaty, and hopefully we'll continue to get further confirmations and everything from the United Nations regarding that, and hopefully it starts to alleviate a lot of these issues. The UN World Food Program actually has estimated that 50% of all of the humanitarian food stocks that they maintain to help people in afflicted areas throughout the world actually comes from the nation of Ukraine. So it's a very important source for the World Food Program and for the global markets, of course. And now we start to drive down here into Crimea, and we have a couple of updates where, of course, as a result of the strikes yesterday, a massive traffic jam continues into day 2. And this massive traffic jam starts really quite a distance before you even get to the Crimean Bridge, as a ton of Russian tourists following the deep strike inside of Ukraine, or inside of Crimea, are trying to flee the area. Right, right now it's tourist season for the Russians, and they're down here in Crimea. It's relatively good weather for them, and they have to cut their vacations fairly short on just the regards of their own safety. In the words of this Russian woman who is currently in a vehicle trying to leave the area, she says, "It's so beautiful here. I don't want to leave. We got so used to it. It was like home." And we can see here, she's rather upset about the situation.
Вообще не хочу уезжать из Крыма, из Алушты. Как здесь классно вообще.
Привыкла, да?
Я привыкла здесь, как в своем доме жили. Настолько все душевно, по-домашнему. Ой, ребят, мы встряли. Выехали, называется, после завтрака. Там просто задница полная. Сними влог с той стороны.
You know what helps not to ruin people's vacations? Not starting a war. That usually helps. Ukraine has said that the war will begin and end in Crimea. They said it began in Crimea in 2014, and Zelensky said it will end in Crimea with its liberation, giving the final declaration regarding goals for Ukraine and what they consider to be victory inside of Ukraine. But to give you an idea of what she was looking at regarding that traffic jam, it is a huge traffic jam. Everything says that they should just leave. That was not their land, and that's still not their land. Well, unfortunately, the Russian Federation will have to be kicked out of Crimea, but it seems that Ukraine has the confidence to do so, and considering the support that they're getting and the persistent strikes that they're conducting, I think they have a pretty good chance, especially when we jump over here and we finally can get some kind of a battle damage assessment as to what happened at the explosions yesterday inside of Crimea. And man, is it big. It is a huge blow to the Russian Air Force, especially when you're talking about their southern operations. Just outside, this is Novofedorivka, which is right here on the coast of Crimea, and they have a very large military base located here. The Russian Federation has been using this, and satellite imagery today has shown the extent of what is likely either a HIMARS or M270 Mars 2 strike using ATACMS that Ukraine may have been given, despite initial reports from the United States that they would not be receiving them. Or, as I had talked about yesterday, I did do some further research and found the weapon system that Ukraine has capable of conducting this strike domestically, and it is called the Grim 2 or Grom or Sapsan, which is a missile system that they actually developed and fielded. They actually, you can see some from the parades that they had in 2018. But there's a large destruction of a large number of aircraft, very evident. It's a very crucial blow to their defense or to their air force. Some Russian channels right now are saying, about 150 casualties, upwards of 150 casualties, either dead, wounded, or actually, dead, wounded, or combined. It depends on the source that you're getting right now. The information is not clear, and I have a feeling we're probably not going to get very good casualty numbers to begin with. But the other thing is that at least 9 aircraft were destroyed, and we actually have them listed: 8 Su-27, 6 Mi-8 helicopters, 5 Su-24s, 4 Su-30Ms, 1 IL-20RT, and at least 4 ammunition depots were reportedly destroyed. And we can see this just coming from the satellite footage here. So this is before the strike, and that is after the strike. Yeah, that's not good. That's not very good at all. That's a huge blow to the Russian Air Force. So it's great for Ukraine, not so much for the Russian Air Force. Once again, we can see here more aircraft. Of course, with all intelligence, they decided to park them wingtip to wingtip on the tarmac because Pearl Harbor wasn't a thing, and nobody learned from that experience. And look at that, they're all destroyed. They got wiped off the face of the earth. Imagine that. Richard Cyburn says, why would they think Crimea was off limits to strikes? Because they are saying that they annexed Crimea, and therefore, after a referendum, it's considered sovereign Russian territory. So Crimea is off limits because you don't strike Russia. Well, no, that's not true at all. And Ukraine doesn't see it that way, and I don't think the international community does either. But quite extensive amounts of damage ongoing here. And as you can see, yeah, the Russian Air Force not doing so hot right now. They took some pretty significant losses there. So that is roughly, from what we can tell from the independent information about the battle damage assessment, an estimated 150 casualties. We don't know of the variance in those. Rumored 150 casualties, dead, wounded, or combined. And about 9 different aircraft that were destroyed in total. Well, 9 physical planes that were destroyed, as well as several helicopters and ammunition depots. So quite an extensive list of destruction here in Crimea, and a very big blow to the Russian Air Force and their capabilities here in the southern part of Ukraine. And that is actually it for everything inside of the country of Ukraine, but there is a ton of stuff outside of the country of Ukraine. We actually start our day off jumping up into Belarus, which we actually haven't heard anything from Belarus for a little bit. But reportedly, at this point, there are reports coming in of explosions at the ShamRocks airfield located just north of the Ukrainian-Belarusian border. According to eyewitnesses, at least 8 explosions took place near the airfield, where Russian military aircraft are often stationed there since the beginning of the invasion in Ukraine. So it's a very good possibility there may have been a strike located here. So that is what we're hearing at this point, but we can't immediately confirm it, but keep that in the back of your mind. Kaysen says people speculate the size of the craters and lack of witnesses seeing missiles flying indicate that a top-down attack, aka the attackums, regarding the Crimea strike. So it's a very good possibility, but considering that you have the AGM-88 that was sent in, or that came in, to Ukraine, and the Pentagon, kind of admitted, yeah, well, we actually sent the AGM-88. Even though it wasn't listed with anything, you have to wonder what else they're going to be sending. They don't specify anything regarding the HIMARS. They specify how many vehicles they would send, but they don't specify the munitions, how many munitions, what types of munitions, whenever they're releasing their official press releases for those security aid assistance packages, such as the $1 billion one that came out on Monday. And we see that pretty frequently. It's very different from what they would do with, say, the 155 millimeter NATO artillery rounds, which are currently, they're getting ready to send, or are sending right now, 75,000 of them, which they clearly state. So it's a very different thought process in those. And up here in Minsk, 5 rail partisans, as they have become known, have been sentenced to prison accused of terrorist acts on railways and burning an effigy of Lukashenko, who's the dictator of Belarus. They are Konstantin Yermolovich, who received 16 years in a maximum security prison, Vitaly Mankovich, who received 15 years, Igor Kozlov, who received 14 years, Nadezhda Polkina, who received 2 years, and Natalia Ked, who received 2 years of restriction of freedoms. Those are reportedly those that were... so here's a video of them burning an effigy of Lukashenko. Yeah, needless to say, they don't really... the Lukashenko really doesn't enjoy these kinds of things. Yeah. He doesn't... I mean, there's been a lot of talk about that. But they were reportedly... so they were accused of leaving explosive devices near railroad tracks. All tries were charged with burning an effigy of Lukashenko in 2021. So a lot of these, we've seen a lot of partisan activity on the part of Belarusians especially during the opening parts of the war, where Russia was using Belarus as a military staging area, and they were bringing a lot of equipment in there, and you saw railway workers themselves were like completely dismantling tracks, and things were derailing and all sorts of stuff. Rich Cyburn says, I've also heard long-range HIMARS is a possibility. HIMARS don't leave craters that wide. Oh, I have to watch an ATACMS launch. Could there have been something it hit that made it larger? Yes, kind of. It's very difficult to really state. The ATACMS is extremely long range. It flies up to public release information. It flies up to 300 kilometers. It's a very long-range weapon system. It's very good at what it does, to say the least. It's very precise. Any HIMARS launch is it will put the warhead within 1 meter of its intended target. It's extremely accurate. Literally 1 meter between its intended target in deviation of its targeted area is between me and the microphone. It will put a missile between me and my microphone right now, no problem. And it will do it at 300 kilometers away. And they're very hard to detect on a Russian radar. The ATACMS is pretty cool, but I don't know a whole lot about how the munition itself actually works. I was operating with HIMARS when I was in Syria, and I have seen HIMARS strikes, but in general, even if you have clearances to know certain things, it's on a need-to-know basis. And as an infantryman in Syria, I didn't need to know how the HIMARS worked. I just needed to know that it did work and that it would do its job really, really well. And I'm going to leave it at that. So I can't answer questions too much, but that is what we're kind of seeing at. And so, as we continue over here into Moscow, we have a ton of stuff happening right now. There, as you can see, there is 8 different points for Moscow. They have come out with a lot of stuff today. And the thing is that here in Moscow, corruption and anti-corruption, essentially. So Alexei Navalny is a political prisoner inside of Russia, and he's been moved around several times. In fact, there have been times where he was poisoned at one point by FSB agents, and they... and he's a political prisoner inside of Russia, essentially. Well, his anti-corruption team discovered that one of the people that prosecuted him, specifically that the daughters of the Russian Deputy Minister of Defense, Alexei, I'm going to try to pronounce this, Krivoruchko, turned out to be U.S. citizens, and that he himself had an apartment in the United States worth several $1 million. So the thing is that Russia has a lot of oligarchies. Oligarchs are usually originally defined as somebody who, during the time of the Soviet Union, maintained all of their wealth and did very well under the Soviet Union. And then after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they were now multimillionaires or billionaires that continued to run businesses and influence a lot of corruption, elections, and political campaigns inside of Russia, and maintained a lot of control even after the fall of the Soviet Union. That has kind of shifted over time as just being in the pocket of whoever's in power. In this case, it's Putin. But as we continue to see here, that seems to be the case. And it seems that Marine Institute News does have a entire article on this if you guys want to go check it out. By the way, we do have a website. It's in the description below, and you can check out any of these maps, by the way, and you can actually go through and click on them. We keep a daily record and daily archive on all of this stuff, so you guys can go check it out. And there's all the donation links are on there too, broken up by region. So my understanding is that there is a ton of you actually watching this right now, which is amazing. We've been trying to, there's 31 of you watching this, which is about, double, if not more than what we normally have here. So for those that don't know, everything we do here is for charity. We're reporting the news for charity, and we're the news that gives back. And the point of this is to give back to charity. We are never doing super chats or anything like this on this channel. 100% of everything we do is for charity, and we're trying to raise money for a bunch of organizations and give back to the very news stories we're talking about. Whether you're talking about Ukraine or drought and famine inside of Ethiopia or Somalia like there is right now, or natural disasters. So please go and check out the description. Please give some support to those organizations below. It's really what this is all about, and this is why we're all doing this. So thank you so much for watching, guys. I can't believe what's happening right now. It's pretty awesome, actually. But anyway, continuing on with the news. Activists are writing anti-war slogans near windows of maternity hospitals. Activists inside of Russia, especially there at St. Petersburg maternity hospital, with the inscription, "You gave birth to a son, not for the war." The inscription appears at a maternity hospital number at this point, and they are also leaving a newspaper. The Znatska Pravda was also placed on the porch of the institution, which is an independent news source. So, very interesting indeed. As you can see, they spray painted that right there onto the pavement. Activists are starting to become more and more very well known inside of Russia. There seems to be a lot more ongoing there. So we're starting to see more, especially with the Free Legion stuff, the Free Russian Legion inside of Russia. We've seen a lot of where they have burned down recruiting institutions and all sorts of stuff, and it's been a lot of that kind of thing. A lot of people aren't super excited to go and join up for the Russian armed forces, because even in Russia, especially the younger generation, they're using VPNs, and which is why you're seeing a lot of talk about VPNs from Russian media right now. It's really preparing for new laws getting ready to be passed by the State Duma, is usually what that leads to, seeing as all Russian news media at this point is controlled by the state. Which, speaking of which, a former newswoman faces up to 10 years in prison now. The ex-editor of Channel 1, Marina Ovsanovka, is being searched in connection with a case of fake news about the army. The court had previously fined her twice for discrediting the armed forces after her statements against the war. She was charged with under an article for fake news about the army, and she could face up to 10 years in prison. And it is the lady who held the giant "No War" sign when she ran behind Channel 1 during their live report. And a propagandist, Simonian, who is currently suing Google for suspending her YouTube channel and is demanding compensation. YouTube did end up canceling and suspending all AdSense to the Russian Federation, and in order to continue to kind of support in their own way. So any Russian YouTubers, regardless of their following, does not get any kind of monetary compensation from their work on YouTube itself, and her account was just completely suspended. So now she's going in on RooTube. Nothing has happened in Crimea if you're in Russia, by the way. The people haven't been able to get across the bridge to tell anybody that something has happened in Crimea. The fact of the matter is that to avoid last night's big news topics at the Saki Air Base, the Russian propagandists there, basically the Russian state news media, discussed that the FBI raid that happened at Trump's Mar-a-Lago house in Mar-a-Lago, Florida. There's a huge FBI raid there. It's very political in a lot of ways, and so we don't really cover politics, or we try to stay apolitical, and I haven't found a good way to really talk about that story. So I apologize if that's something you're looking for and I haven't covered it. We try to stay apolitical here if we can, or at least be openly stating our bias like we have for Ukraine. So I just haven't covered that in a very good way yet. So, but anyway, they're speculating for civil war right now between Republicans and Democrats inside the United States. That's what the Russian state media is talking about. They're speculating whether or not the U.S. is going to fall into civil war. They're expressing their support for a lot of Trump's opinions and on the current U.S. politics, instead of talking about the ginormous attack that happened on their own airbase. Just take a look.
А теперь о том, что потрясло сегодня США и весь мир едва ли не больше ядерной угрозы. Беспрецедентной в истории страны назвали американские конгрессмены операцию ФБР в имении Дональда Трампа. Сразу сотни агентов искали в его доме некие документы, которые якобы представляют угрозу национальной безопасности. Конгрессмены теперь требуют от ФБР немедленного отчета, конкретных фактов, которые докажут стране и миру, что прошедший обыск не является попыткой расправиться с кандидатом в президенты на предстоящих в 2024 году выборах.
We're not going to listen to 4 minutes of that crap, but just letting you know that it did happen, and that apparently the thing that shook the world, at least according to the Russians, was the Mar-a-Lago raid by the FBI. Not to include the fact that there's ongoing investigations and hearings on the national level about it. So it is totally within the right of the FBI to search for those things. Russia tries to blame COVID-19 on the United States. Something that's perpetuated for far longer than it probably should have is the biolabs thing. And the Russian Federation continues to just blab about this just constantly. This is actually coming from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation and their official Twitter, because even though Twitter is banned in Russia, if you're an official government agency, you can pretty much post whatever you want. So they are suggesting that the United States, using biolabs in places like Ukraine, actually made the COVID-19 virus. Despite the fact that China, an ally of Russia, already admitted that the virus came from Wuhan, China. It's just the fact that the original origin within Wuhan is very contested. There's a lot of stuff about it. It's led to a lot of conspiracy theories and very wide-ranging theories, some from plausible theories to some that are really, really wacky. But regardless of what those theories are, even China admitted that it came from them. So I don't know. And here it is. In fact, even Twitter said this tweet violated Twitter rules on sharing false or misleading info that might bring harm to crisis-affected populations. However, to preserve this content for accountability purposes, Twitter has determined that this tweet should remain available. So here it is regarding, the origin of the new coronavirus pathogen. All regarding U.S. programs. Cool. That's fantastic, guys. Once again, we've proven all of this stuff wrong. And I really don't feel like doing it a second time, because the fact is that it's a biolaboratory. We're talking about biological weapons, and the fact is that the U.S. really doesn't maintain any of that stuff. Even in their last report that we debunked, it was about the fact that they were testing things like Ebola. They were testing the Ebola virus. And the very own statements that they had said that they had live things of Ebola because you need live things of Ebola to test and see how to make better detection methods to prevent and detect further expansion of the Ebola virus. You can't kill something and then try to study it when you're at a microscopic level. It's very difficult. Believe it or not, my cousin's actually a microbiologist in this stuff and deals with that every day. And I asked her, I was like, hey, would it make sense that they would keep this stuff alive? And they're like, yeah, we have live anthrax virus. Yeah, we have live anthrax virus. It's very dangerous. It's very well contained and it's very well monitored, but they need it to conduct further research to, make sure that you and I don't get sick and die. That's kind of a thing. Speed says, I wonder if they know about the monkeypox yet. No, they're pretty focused on COVID-19, but I'm sure they do. I mean, it's the WHO put something out about monkeypox. So I'm sure everyone knows about monkeypox. It really hasn't become, everyone's focused on COVID-19 and other stuff ongoing right now, and they're not in the war in Ukraine and everything else. They're not really focused on monkeypox. But I think it's something to at least keep your eye on, because it has been spreading. So just stay safe, people. Wash your hands. If you feel sick, stay home, that kind of thing. That's my little PSA. And of course, They also, the Russian Federation, specifically the United Nations, the Russian Federation delegation to the United Nations, stated, posted about the U.S. nuclear doctrine, which I'm just going to bring it up to you here. So they said U.S. doctrinal documents stipulate the use of nuclear weapons under the pretext of a threat of its or its allies' vital interests. It means that the United States reserves the possibility to use nuclear weapons at any time for any reason against any state simply by claiming its vital interests are affected. Well, Russia maintains the exact same nuclear doctrine, and lo and behold, they also talk about it a lot more. The United States, we never talk about the fact that we are ready to use nuclear weapons. We never talk about, we will use nuclear weapons to protect our state if we are threatened or if there's an attack on our soil. We never talk about that because it's pretty much implied, considering we're the only country to have ever used nuclear weapons in combat. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We're the only country to have ever actually used nuclear weapons for their intended purpose. It's pretty implied that the United States has them and would use them if someone, attacked us, or if the MAD doctrine was introduced. But we don't need to talk about it. We don't. The most that even John Kirby, who's the spokesman for the Department of Defense, he was asked in regards to how are our nuclear arsenals, and this was back when Russia was saber rattling even more, and they were putting their nuclear troops on high alert and all that fun stuff. He said, "Yeah, we're good to go. Like, we're always ready. No, it doesn't matter." And that's it. He didn't have anything to add to it. He didn't say, "Yeah, we'll nuke the hell out of them." Like, he didn't go into a whole bunch of stuff like, "We'll use nuclear weapons. We should go into war with Russia." He didn't use any of that like Russia does. He just says, "Yeah, we got them. They're good to go. If something happens, it happens. We'll deal with it." And it just moved on. It doesn't need to talk about it. The U.S. doesn't need to flaunt it. And not only that, but the Russian Federation also has suspended any U.S. teams from inspecting their nuclear stockpiles. That is something that is supposed to be ongoing under the New START Treaty, which is the nuclear drawdown treaty, the one of the only ones that have been started since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So U.S. forces are no longer allowed to go in and inspect the nuclear arsenal in Russia, and it's becoming kind of curious as to why. So the rhetoric regarding the non-proliferation treaty the treaty conference has not gone very well this far, and the prospects of renewing another one as the current one expires in 2026 is kind of looking even slimmer considering the current geopolitical situation. And according to Russia's mission to the OSCE, their delegation to the OSCE has stated that the United States has pretty much entered the war as a combatant. Now, we've heard this rhetoric a lot of times from the Russian state media, but that's the thing, it was from Russian state media. The fact of the matter is this is now a government agency saying this, and a government representative and politician saying this. And that's a different level. As we can see here, of course, anytime they don't want you to read something, they tweet it in Russian, by the way, because they don't expect most Americans to hit the Google Translate button. And they say, "We warn of the harmful nature of the increase in deliveries to Ukraine, to Kyiv, of the most destabilizing and long-range systems, as well as munitions for them, and intensive transmission of intelligence data in real time. Basically, stop reporting our troop movements and everything else with your better information technology." And then they further say, "By acting this way, the United States and its allies become not only accomplices in war crimes of the armed forces of Ukraine and the nationalist formations, but actually parties to the conflict with all the ensuing negative consequences." I just want to point this out, that is a very poor choice of words, and that it would not go very well to attack the United States, Russia. It would be a very poor financial decision and political decision on their part. But it is something that the OSCE has now stated, which is slightly concerning, considering that they are a government agency for the Russian Federation, as opposed to just, say, a Russian news network, which we hear that rhetoric quite often on a Russian state-run news media website. We jump down here to Belgorod for a little bit of a different twist of news here, and that's because a woman and her son were attacked by a 16-year-old boy. A stranger approached a 24-year-old Antonina when she was leading her son from kindergarten and began to demand money. He punched her in the face and then plunged a sharp object that looked like a screwdriver into her head. The girl screamed, and the guy then started to attack her child, once again a kindergartner. The girl screamed, and after which he ran away. With the last of her strength, the victim was able to call her mother and report the attack. Antonina has had a closed craniocerebral injury, and the child was diagnosed with 3 penetrating wounds, one of which was in the heart. The boy is in a coma, unfortunately. The doctors are fighting for the child's life. The media noted that the law enforcement officers identified, accused, and detained this said individual. What? Rather terrible situation, unfortunately. And that starts to lead us down here into the Middle East as we start getting into a lot more of the more international news going on. And over here in Azerbaijan, in areas occupied by Armenian troops are actually taking crosses from churches. They're cutting out the crosses from the walls of the Church of the Holy Resurrection in Burzazar to save them, according to them. The church is likely to be destroyed and converted into a mosque by Azerbaijan once the Armenians surrender. You can check that out here. So as you can see, he's cutting out the crosses from the church itself. Jump down here into Syria, where a PKK commander was killed. The car of the head of the Iranian wing of the PKK, Yusuf Mahmoud Rabbani, was blown up, as a result of which he died there on the spot. Reportedly, the strike was carried out by a Turkish UAV. This comes as military tensions between Turkey and Syria and the Kurdish formations inside of Syria have reached an all-time high, following what would have been the all-time high back in 2020 and 2019 with the Turkish incursion into Syria, declaring a 30-kilometer military exclusion zone. Well, down here in the south, the Syrian army is actually fighting here by Erbil. The army is currently shelling a city where rebels are currently hiding. The Syrian army began fighting in the city of Tafas in the Dara province. The reason is the escape from the city of several wanted persons 2 days ago. They're not who at this point are not specified, but after the military pulled their forces to the city, they began to shell it. Over a couple of people, they're shelling a city. At the moment, there are reports of casualties among the residents of the city, as well as the beginning of battles with local rebels, during which a tank and a CAA bulldozer were destroyed. As a result, the Syrian army launched such operations either as a revenge for some major attack or to crush a large number of disgruntled rebels who periodically come into conflict with the military. This time, probably decided to carry out a punitive attack on the city for concealing opponents of the authorities. You can see some of these attacks here.
مدينة طفس قوات النظام تستهدف السهول الجنوبية من مدينة طفس استهداف إحدى المنشآت المحيطة في مدينة طفس.
Needless to say, so the Syrian civil war is still ongoing. It's been ongoing since, I want to say, 2014. It's a very complicated situation all in all. There's, I would bet to say, about 40 different factions inside of Syria fighting. Even when I was there, it was stupid complicated, and I couldn't fully comprehend it, and I was in the country. The main thing is you have the Islamic State, you have the Kurds. Those are divided up into several different groups. The PKK is a Kurdish Marxist group. And then you also have the YPG, YPJ, which form the YPK, which have close relations with the PKK, but they are not the same thing. They are a democratic group, and they actually form the majority of the SDF, or the Syrian Democratic Forces. You also have the Turkish and Turkish-backed rebels, so they have formed an incursion into the country and set about a 30-kilometer zone inside of Al-Hasaka and the Aleppo provinces. And then you also have the Syrian National Army, as well as different rebel factions, especially within the south, as well as the Russian Federation, which is assisting with the Operational Command South there inside of Syria, and a large contingent of the Wagner Group, as well as about 70,000 Iranian fighters, at least as of 2017. So it's quite a mix-up. You also have the Islamic State in here, which they're everywhere, and they're a nuisance more than anything. As we jump over here into Iraq, we have a couple of different developments. First of all, over here in Mikdadia, sorry, I once again suck at pronunciation. A rally is going on against blackouts that are taking place inside of the city within the Diyala province, which is in the northwestern part of Baghdad. And here what is ongoing is basically there's a lot of electrical shortages inside, there's a lot of energy shortages inside of Iraq, and this is on top of other issues that are compounding, including political instability within the country, and as well as a major drought and famine. In fact, the famine is probably about to be ongoing in full swing as we started getting into some of these harvest seasons. In fact, the drought has caused 30% losses in agricultural and arable land in many parts of Iraq as the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers in many places have dried up. As we go down here into Baghdad, Sadr has made his demands. Muqtada al-Sadr, he's a peach. Anyway, Muqtada al-Sadr is a very big political entity. He is really popular amongst especially poorer sects of the, I want to say it's the Shia population inside of Iraq, and the thing is, he has demanded to dissolve the Iraqi parliament within a week, otherwise promising to intensify the protests of his supporters. The Supreme Court of Iraq told Muqtada that they did not have the authority to dissolve the parliament and that there was no constitutional or legal basis for this to occur. Muqtada al-Sadr is a political radical. In fact, he actually fought against the United States occupational forces in Iraq as leading an insurgency, also known as the Mahdi Army. He's also heavily backed by the Kataib Hezbollah, which is an Iranian-backed organization inside of Iraq that, while Iraq sees it as an ally, they also fought against the United States and were actually the ones that led the Baghdad embassy protests. In fact, they took a giant, like 6-story banner of Muqtada al-Sadr's face and put it on in the front of an apartment building on Al-Kindi Street at the U.S. Embassy when I was there back in early 2020. So quite an extensive thing ongoing here, but needless to say, he has made his political demands and they likely once again will not be met. And as we jump down here to Basra, Basra was having an issue as a result of the major drought. Fresh water really isn't flowing into the Persian Gulf anymore. Instead, the Persian Gulf is flowing into Iraq itself. And what has happened is the water here in Basra has actually become so salinated that you can't drink it. It's no longer potable water. And the potable water, they led protests in Basra to get clean drinking water to them. Well, the Iraqi government responded, and we can see what this clean drinking water looks like.
يعني طين الله أكبر شنو هذا الماي هذا ماي البصرة ويلكم البصرة أغنى دولة بالعالم الله أكبر ربي ها طين شنو هاي يلا وينكم بوعوا يا حكومتنا.
Needless to say, if you are in Basra, you are not a very happy person, and that is not what I would want if I said I need clean drinking water to live, and then that was the response. JP says Russia attacking any NATO allies would make their situation untenable, I think. And then Rooster Cyber says, do you think that Russia would attack a NATO member? I really don't like to theorize that. To answer your question, it would be, to start with JP, it would be very untenable for them. And so it really doesn't make sense for Russia to do that. They can't win the war that they're currently fighting, and they probably wouldn't win against 30 countries. 32 more than likely here now. And I don't like to hypothesize as to whether or not Russia would Because here's the fact of the matter is Russia is very unpredictable. It's a very fluid and tense geopolitical situation in a lot of games. What I will say is that right now there are still a lot of political options that we as the average viewers wouldn't really be able to come up with. There's a lot more options than what people think. And I don't like to say that war is imminent between NATO and Russia, because there's a lot more options than I would have ever thought of. And we even see that during, say, when Iran fired the missiles into Iraq. The U.S. didn't immediately respond by attacking Iran. So there's a lot of options that, and a lot of stuff that's happening backdoors, behind closed doors, backyard deals, and alleyway deals, and all sorts of phone calls ongoing right now to prevent that kind of thing. Daniel DeWing says, after all these months, I'm stupefied by absolutely no combined arms on part of the Russians. Single tanks and APCs will not do anything except incur deaths. So be it then. Sorry, guys, I really needed to cough there. We have seen combined arms. It's just done really poorly. So the thing about the Russian Federation is that their doctrine does not include light infantry. The Russian doctrine is really broken up into, I used to say 3, based off of the Soviet doctrine, but really the Russian doctrine was really changed back in 2014 when they signed the new one. But it basically is in 2 phases. You have a precursor bombardment, which heavily saturates an area with high explosives and is meant to demoralize and soften up resistance, which is where you're seeing the Scorcher tactics. Mariupol, for instance, Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, and places like Seversk and Soledar right now. That's where you're seeing a lot of precursor bombardment. Slavyansk and Kramatorsk as well received quite a bit of precursor bombardment too, and this is really softening up resistance, as there's expected to be another major offensive there in the north towards Slavyansk, as they can try to do a large encirclement movement inside of the Donbass. The Russian Federation doesn't maintain any light infantry. Everything they have is motorized and mechanized. They believe in fast, light maneuver warfare. Very hard-hitting maneuver warfare that's led by armored forces. That's meant to basically plow through their enemy lines and to create openings and gaps in the lines that they can then use to exploit. And they do this with a large armored spearhead. The result is that they don't deploy a lot of infantry per se, and they don't have a lot of infantry supporting their armor. You see this in a lot of different aspects, that Russia is a little bit opposite of when you're thinking of, say, U.S. doctrine. U.S. is going to put infantry and have it supported by tanks. Russia's going to put tanks and support it with infantry. They put the big steel things in front of the really squishy soft things, which seems like a really commonsensical thing, because the big steel things are going to give it a lot of protection, but it makes them very vulnerable. They don't have clear vision, line of sights. They have very poor maneuverability, especially in urban areas, making them very easy targets. And you see that in even aspects of the vehicle features themselves. Russian troop hatches actually open forward on Russian vehicles. They open forward in order to protect the crew commander, or the vehicle commander, or the vehicle gunner. They don't open to the rear. The ideology is, that way, what can't see me or shoot me can't kill me. Or what I can see can't kill me, but they lose a lot of vision, a lot of things regarding that. U.S. troops or NATO hatches open to the rear because you want to be able to have 360-degree vision, and you wouldn't have that open top mentality, so that way you're not losing your situational awareness with the U.S. in that way. Because if I can see it and I can engage it, before it engages me, it won't kill me. That's kind of the methodology. So, I see that in a lot of aspects with the Russian Federation. But their issue is they're taking unsustainable losses, and therefore what you end up having is the armored forces end up overrunning or outrunning a lot of their supporting assets, and they end up becoming isolated and then quickly destroyed. and we see that quite often. So that's kind of the situation with it. It's just because they use it very heavily mechanized, and they're very poor at coordinating fires. The Russian Air Force has its own objectives, but it's not really in a lot of supporting roles for the ground troops. And they also don't have air supremacy, so it's very difficult for them to achieve anything militarily from the air. And then their artillery obviously is saturation, so it's not a precision, I need you to hit this grid. It's I need you to hit from this end of the field to this end of the field and level it. And that's kind of where you're getting all that. So it's kind of backwards. Daniel DeWing says, yeah, but why don't they attack in platoon and company formations? Maybe I read too much Team Yankee as a kid. Lack of infantry is a killer, literally. Yeah, it is. Well, they do attack in platoon and company formations. In fact, this is what we saw in regards to Ukraine. This is what we saw before the major offensive in Bakhmut, is there were minor offensives in the area that were easily repelled by Ukrainian forces. In fact, Ukraine reported very heavily that they were having successes. I didn't report that they had repelled a lot of offensives very heavily, because I knew, based off of what we were being told and what we were seeing, is that they were attacking in platoon and company size attacks. The issue is that you're not going to break a very static Ukrainian line like that. In the Donbass, it's a very heavily fortified static defensive lines that have been there since 2014. It's very difficult to break through something like that with nothing but a company-sized attack, and Russia really needs its armor force, and they were really unsupported company-sized attacks, so you didn't have a main effort in supporting efforts. So really, it's a lack of manpower. It's a lack of a lot of things. It's a lack of coordination of fires, which we've seen be even more impacted by destruction of command and control centers and unsustainable losses, especially amongst officers. And we also see a lot of logistical breakdown that makes these attacks also pretty ineffective, simply because their troops can't get supplied. You can win the engagement taking a place with what the ammunition you have on hand. But when the counterattack comes in, you're going to be pushed right back off of it, and they can't sustain it. JP says many captured Russians have mentioned breakdowns of APCs, tanks, etc. during interviews. Yeah, they're using old Soviet stuff. It's old stuff. It's very analog. They're very easy to use, but they're also very prone to breakdowns, and they're not very good vehicles, especially for this long of sustained. And they probably, most of them haven't had a lot of maintenance done to them, and they haven't been very well maintained, a lot of which being in storage. Because you got to remember, their newest stuff was destroyed pretty early on in the war, so what they're getting is the stuff that's been sitting in storage for the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and it's not going very well for them because they haven't been maintaining the stuff in their storage. They have a huge armored force. They literally have entire areas where they have rusting tank hulls, you know, laying in the middle where they shut down the factory and just never built the rest of the T-72s. But they're useless and they're not maintained, so there's no point in bringing them out. And we've even shown some of that here on the stream, where they're shipping T-80s in to get retrofitted before being shipped to the front. In fact, they have T-62s on the front, and we've seen a T-34 in use. So the Russians aren't doing very well, no. They're going to have a lot of breakdowns because they don't maintain their stuff, and there's a lot of corruption inside of the military and organization itself. So oligarchs are a thing, once again. Jump over here to Afghanistan, getting back here into the updated news, and we see that no confirmation yet from the Taliban regarding the death of Ayman al-Zawahiri. Taliban spokesman says that the Taliban has not yet found confirmation of the presence of Ayman al-Zawahiri in Kabul. If the Pentagon had such information at its disposal, then it was obliged to share it with the leadership of the group. Otherwise, Washington's actions would be regarded as a violation of the Doha Agreement. The Mujahid reiterated that the territory of Afghanistan would not be used by militants as a springboard for attacks on other countries. Today, hundreds of people took to anti-American rallies in the provinces of Kabul, Herat, and Nangarhar. The demonstrators chanted anti-Joe Biden slogans and denounced the U.S. for airstrikes, echoing his rhetoric of Zabihullah Mujahid. The protesters also demanded that neighboring countries not let American aircraft through their airspace to strike in Afghanistan. According to some reports, Pakistan played an important role in the elimination of al-Zawahiri. So that's the report we're getting here, and we can take a look at this.
مشخصات د همدغه حادثې په اړه باندې دي نه جهان ته وړاندې کړي دي نه بایدن خپلې کورنۍ ته وړاندې کړي دي نه د امریکا خلکو ته نه د افغانستان خلکو ته د هغه خلکو سره چې د امریکا ضد زموږ د هغو سره خبره نشته زموږ خبره فقط د خپلې خاورې په خاطر د خپل استقلالیت په خاطر.
So as you can see, pretty upset about this, but that's something that has been ongoing for quite some time, and there's also a lot of people that aren't how do I say this, they're not very happy. They were under occupation for 20 years. Ervis Singh says, is that the ISIS person? No, that is the leader of Al-Qaeda. So Azawari was the number 2 man right behind Osama bin Laden. And Osama bin Laden, I believe, was killed in 2011. And then they killed him this year, Al-Zawari. They just killed him a couple weeks ago. He assisted in planning the September 11th attacks back in 2001. And I believe he also assisted Osama bin Laden in planning the original World Trade Center bombing. I believe that was back in 1990. I want to say 1998. I was like 1 when that happened, so I don't, if I was even born yet. So he had planned a lot of stuff with him. He was number 2. He basically was in charge of Al-Qaeda, and he's been in charge of Al-Qaeda since the death of Osama bin Laden. He's been the head honcho. So killing him he's basically enemy of the state number 1 if you're in the United States and conducting counterterrorism operations. You want to kill that guy first. He's target number 1, right behind Osama. Osama bin Laden's dead. He was number 1. This guy immediately took his place. Over here in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, here in Mutembo, unknown militants attacked the city of Mutembo. And the thing is that they attacked the central prison within the city, which is located in the North Kivu province. The attack began at 2 o'clock this morning, local time. In addition to the prison, the city hall became a target of the militants. During the attack, 2 guards were killed, and a militant of the Mai Mai group was also killed. Some of the prisoners broke free after the attack. Citizens seized the 3 alleged terrorists, killed them, and burned their bodies. Wow. Yeah. Well, I can't say I blame them. There's a lot of activity in North Kivu. You're seeing a lot of activity, especially from the Islamic State within the North Kivu province of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And so a lot of militant attacks within this region. It sounds like this is the Mai Mai group, possibly. But they said it's really unknown persons, so it could also have been the Islamic State. Normally, the Islamic State takes at least 24 hours to actually claim an attack. So we'll see if that ends up getting updated tomorrow with an official statement from them. But we can see here, they're capturing a lot of weapons and equipment. The issue with Africa is that it is, according to the Morocco conference, it is the leading fight against the Islamic State and other militant organizations, terrorist organizations. The reason being is Africa, unlike places such as the Middle East, where the Kurds have been getting U.S. and coalition support, and the Iraqis got a lot of support and training and stuff from the United States and coalition partners. Africa hasn't gotten that nearly as much attention, and a lot of these are poor countries to begin with. They're not very stable economically, and therefore they do not have the monetary capacity to really build a very large and very well-trained and well-equipped military to conduct really good counterterrorism operations. So in Africa, unlike what you saw in the Middle East, where coalition partners and the Iraqi army and the YPG and the YPJ, they had a advantage militarily, both in training and in armament and equipment. Against the Islamic State, the thing is that in Africa, the Islamic State and the military are essentially equal in their capacities. They are equally capable of fighting wars against each other as if it was 2 African nations fighting wars against each other. They have an immense amount of power in Africa, especially in Mozambique, the DRC, and in Mali. So it's quite significant, and it's a real problem. It's a huge problem here in Africa. As To jump over here to Mali, Russia delivered several military aircraft to the military junta in Mali. Reportedly Su-25 aircraft, L-39s, Mi-8s, and an Mi-24 attack helicopter gunship was given to Mali by the Russian Federation. This comes not very long after the military junta of Mali actually kicked out all coalition partners, especially France, and after Russian Wagner mercenaries attempted to stage a mass grave at a French military camp, but were caught on drone footage setting it up by a French drone. So there seems to be a lot of cooperation between them, and as we can see here, this is coming from RIA Novosti, which is a Russian government news agency.
Excellence, Monsieur le Président de la Transition, chef de l'État,
The fact that Russia was willing to give this stuff up is absolutely baffling, considering the losses that they're taking in Ukraine, but whatever, man. Degrade yourself, that's fine. As you can see, they're bringing in more aircraft. That's an Su-25. That was also known as a Frogfoot. It's a ground attack aircraft. Think of it as the Russian equivalent to the A-10. Richard Sideburn says, so Russia has extra helicopters to spare? Exactly, yeah. No, but to them, yeah. But yeah, that's an Su-25 Frogfoot. Whenever you hear that Ukraine shot down an Su-25 or whatever, that's the aircraft they're talking about. It's the Russian equivalent. It's a ground attack aircraft or a close air support aircraft. And it's basically the Russian equivalent of the A-10, except it sucks a lot more. But that's very similar capabilities in what they're trying to do there. And that is the Mi-24 Hind attack helicopter gunship. It has a limited crew. It also has a limited troop carrying capacity, so it can be used as a transport helicopter too. And it can carry up to 8 fully loaded infantrymen in the back of the helicopter in the belly. It's also affectionately known as the flying tank by its air crews. It's a very effective and very deadly gunship, and is very capable within its role. That appears to be, I want to say it's the L-29. It's a light jet aircraft, and it's a very cheap one. I say cheap, of course I would never be able to afford this. It's very maneuverable, it's very fast, but it can also fly very low and slow if need be, so it's very good for close air support, but it can carry very little armament on it, so it really only makes it for, it can conduct very limited sorties in its capacity. But that is all of the toys that Russia gave to Mali. Jump over here into Mexico, where a wave of violence has swept across the nation. Violence in several Mexican cities, including Guadalajara, Puato, Celaya, and others. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel is believed to have launched the attacks in retaliation to the arrest or death of a high-ranking commander. So a lot of violence sweeping across Mexico. There's a lot of issues in regards to the cartels within Mexico, as many people already know. There is a lot of corruption inside of Mexico as a result, but there's also a lot of, in some areas of Mexico, the cartel is actually better. Some of the cartels are actually better outfitted than the military is. So it's very difficult for Mexico to maintain any kind of peace or order inside of their nation, to the point that it's, in some regards, on the verge of collapse, and some experts believe it may be on the verge of collapse. But time will tell, and I think we'll just kind of have to play it by ear. But Mexico is still, trying to fight against the cartels in at least some capacities, and is having some victories in some areas, but having some pretty major losses in others. As you can see here, some of these attacks getting ready to take place. And yeah, they can just do it in broad daylight like this. There's not a whole lot of, there's not, if you're in the cartel, unless there's another cartel, there's not a whole lot they're going to be able to do, basically. The government's not really going to be able to do a whole lot because, once again, a lot of these guys are better outfitted than the government is.
¡Córrele, córrele, la verga! ¡Pura gente, señor Bencho, la verga! ¡No más a la verga! Ciérrale, ciérrale.
As you see, these guys have tactical vests on. They're well armed. They're rolling around. Yeah, they really carry some equipment, even though they're doing some stuff like this, which really doesn't need all of that. They still have that, and sometimes the Mexican army doesn't have it. Jump up here to Los Angeles, and this is here in California, of course. And a single-engine aircraft carrying a pilot and one passenger ended up crash landing in California's 91 freeway after an engine malfunction. The two people inside the plane were unharmed, but it did end up clipping a truck, and that ended up igniting a fire on the ground at the impact about 12:30 p.m. earlier this afternoon local time. The Corona Fire Department was promptly on scene and did say that that was the result of the aircraft hitting the truck. But everyone in the plane was unharmed. We do not know the condition of the driver of the vehicle, but we are at this point assuming that he is also all right.
They just reopened LA County. Oh, plane crashed! Right behind.
It's good to hear that no one was injured in that, and that everyone is good after that helicopter or after that plane crash. So it's good to see when things all work out okay, despite a pretty terrible situation. Your engine loss or engine loss in a single prop aircraft is not usually a good thing, but any landing you walk away from is a good landing. Rooster Cyberman says, "I don't know how I feel about these airplanes landing on roads or putting people in danger." Well, yes and no, but there's a reason to do it. There's a reason not to do it. Usually try to look for an open field, but if you're in LA, there's not really one to do so. And so the safest place to be able to put it down so you don't end up crashing into people's homes, which is a lot worse, is actually on the highway, because at least cars can move out of the way. Houses can't, and families can't. They're not going to know until the plane hits them. So, especially when you're in LA. LA is huge. I used to live out in California for a while, and LA is pretty big. This whole area is just heavily populated. There's not a whole lot of good places to land a plane if you have an emergency. But that actually brings us into the interesting news of the night. For those that don't know, we tried a lot of this stuff is really dark and depressing, which luckily we're being the news that gets back, or trying to be, where we do all these fundraisers and stuff for this stuff. But we also understand that it can kind of get gloom and doomy around here, and so every single night we try and end on an interesting or good note. And so we try to find news stories that are either interesting developments in science or archaeology or what have you, or maybe it's just something cool, or maybe it's good news that happened, and all of those are highlighted in purple. So that's kind of why I skip around on some of this stuff. And the first thing we have is actually coming out of the Colorado Plateau here in the northern part of New Mexico near Four Corners. A 37,000-year-old mammoth butchering site uncovered in New Mexico might be the earliest evidence of humans in North America. Some of the bones at the site showed signs of being handled by humans or even being used as tools. If the team is correct about the human activity at the site, it would almost double the amount of time humans have occupied North America. However, determining the exact date that the people first appeared in North America has been a controversial subject over the past few decades, and similar studies have been dismissed as inconclusive. Some experts are similarly skeptical of the conclusions that the team has drawn from the mammoth's remains at this point. But we can go ahead and take a look, and that is their excavation site at this point. Really fascinating. This thing is a desert, and there's a mammoth down here. Of course, it wasn't always a desert. rather temperate climate, especially during the Ice Age. But as you can see, it seems that this mammoth was butchered, and you can see right here is where they're suspecting these are cut marks from like Paleolithic knives, essentially, when they're butchering it. But if you want more information on this, you can go and check out their article on livescience.com. I'm going to actually jump back over here into Germany, where this is over by Lübeck. And right here on the river, they have maritime archaeologists in northern Germany have discovered a wreckage of a 400-year-old cargo ship that sank almost standing up straight. In fact, it has escaped the decay of shipworms, and it still has barrels of lime that was used for stone building industries centuries ago on board in its cargo hold. The ship, a rare discovery, is from the Hanseatic period, when a group of northern European trade guilds dominated the Baltic and northern seas from the 13th to the 17th century. The wrecked ship was between 66 to 82 feet, or 20 to 25 meters long, and may have been a galliot or single-masted cargo ship common during the Hanseatic period. The layer of river mud over the wreck may have prevented it from being colonized by Teredo nivalis, a type of saltwater clam called shipworm that rapidly eats submerged wood. You can see that they have the remains down there right now that they're checking out. I mean, this is just fascinating to me that you can have ships that are basically sitting, upright on the bottom, and they survive for hundreds of years. And the Dead Sea has some amazing shipwreck finds down there, is because nothing lives in the Dead Sea, nothing eats the shipwrecks down there. But finding these discoveries is always pretty fascinating to me. I love archaeology and history, so I love reading about this kind of stuff. And who knows, maybe there'll be a lot of interesting stuff that they can find out about how lime was made, or how lime was used more correctly, depending on the period. Oh, wonderful. So, of course, as the channel grows, we also seem to grow in things such as the Russian trolls. So, here's the thing. I have no problem with a difference in opinion. In fact, I highly encourage differing opinions, and I please encourage differing opinions, intellectually differing opinions, in good conversations, without turning into an absolute mess and a fight and name-calling and whatever else, derogatory terms, being used on our Discord as well, but also in the chat. And someone has said, this is GCF off, says Putin left Russia, he is seeking asylum in North Korea or China or Iran or in Kadyrov's hut. And here's the thing, I don't believe that's true. Putin has pretty much full control of Russia, and he's pretty much untouchable. So, interesting statement, but if you have any proof of this, usually if you're going to make pretty big claims like that, I highly recommend you have some kind of proof to back it up. Preferably multiple sources. Like here, we always have sources regarding everything here, and if you have more sources for us, we'd love to check them out too. But I highly recommend just having a good source if you're going to try and report something like that. That's a pretty big news, and I think we probably would have found out about it from some kind of intelligence agency somewhere in the world who literally has an eye everywhere. So with that, that's actually the end of the news, though, and luckily we ended on a couple of cool notes. Once again, if you want to check out any of those two cool articles there, they are on Live Science for you guys, and you can also go to our website and you can check out the map and click on them from there. But thank you all for joining us. I heard it's a very cool stream tonight. A lot of people seem to have come and watched. I'm very happy to see all the new faces here and get all these really cool questions. I love answering questions and comments here on the channel to the best of my abilities. And I hope that you guys have enjoyed the news. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for allowing us to be the news that gives back. The whole point of this project is for charity. We don't believe here it's a whole group of us, so please give your hands to the staff. They're the ones that really put this stuff together and do a lot of research. Over 300 different sources that we have vetted thus far, and they go through all of them and they sort this stuff out for you guys, and I really just put points on a map and talk about it all night long. So thank you so much and make sure you give your hand to them. But the whole point of this is for charity. None of us here actually agree on profiting off of people's misery, so we're never doing super chats, we're never pushing merchandising, we're never doing any of that on this channel. 100% of everything we do is for charity. We want to give back directly to the news stories that we talk about here every single night, and the best way to do that is through you guys. So if you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, give us a like and subscribe and help us grow the community. We have a bigger impact as a community the more people that come here and enjoy the streams and enjoy the news, but also help us in giving to these charities. We want to be able to put a fundraiser on every single stream we do, and we have a long way to get there, but as things show, you guys seem to love the idea and continue to support the community. So thank you so much. Please be sure to check out the description. Please, please, please support the organizations in the description. I cannot emphasize that enough. They're wonderful. We've gone through and vetted them. 80% or more of all the donations that they receive actually go to the programs and actually go to helping people. We're not here to pay salaries and administration's costs. We want to help people, and those are some of the best organizations to do it with, and we cannot wait to continue to support them into far into the future. And with these organizations, if you have one that we may not have that covers another part of the world, such as say South America or Mexico or Africa or somewhere like that, please jump onto our Discord. The link's also in the description. Come join in and hang out in the awesome community that we have here. It's very active. But get in touch with the staff member. Let them know. Give them a link, and you can even shoot it over to me. Give us a short description of that organization. We'll get the vetting process started on that, and hopefully we can get it added to the stream and the website and everything. We want to fill out the entire description on YouTube, which is 5,000 characters, by the way, with nothing but links. And so please continue shooting that to us. We love getting them. We're vetting some right now. We love getting those from the community. But thank you so much for the support. Thank you even more so for the support for these organizations. That's really the main purpose of this. And hopefully we'll see you back once again tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Central. And yeah, my name is Paul from the New News. I hope that you have a wonderful Thursday. I hope that you guys have a wonderful starting to begin end of the week. And I hope that you guys remain safe, that your family and your friends remain safe. And if not, I hope you find that safety and security in the very near future. I really don't want any of the viewers going through any of the stuff that we're reporting here on the news. I really don't want any of you guys to be involved in those statistics. But hopefully we'll continue seeing you around and see you active on the Discord. But my name is Paul from the New News. I hope that you'll be joining us tomorrow night. Have a fantastic rest of your night, guys, and a wonderful start to your Thursday. See ya.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волновахи, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Нам не треба ні конфлікту, ні війни. Та ми готові всіх вас звать до сатани. Тисячі вже полягло, і все більше шлейфуємо. То для них нема нічого, крім труни. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волновахи, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Вызволять пришел, братишка, ну привет. На моей земле тебе один ответ. Нашим людям печем, даже танки и бачок. Вам не взять нас и за 100 000 лет. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волновахи, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО.
Mr. Putin, on behalf of all our guys, no one's scared of your nuclear device. You can take your top-11 and shove it up your wrinkled bum. Oh, we'll come and help you fit it in your skull.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волновахи, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волновахи, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО.